So first up, with a bit of a confession, I'm not actually an architect. I completed my Part 2 in 2009, and since then I've been variously doing academic research, teaching, and also sustainability consultancy. But today I'm going to talk about retrofit with a focus on housing. And though you can't, okay, is that better? Focus on housing. And so as architects, I think you have a really huge potential to make a big impact through your refurbishment projects, but you're also facing and juggling a whole load of challenges from kind of budgets and conflicting priorities, which can get in the way of actually kind of getting off the ground. So I'm going to talk a bit about what's involved in a retrofit, go through some case studies of examples of projects, and then hopefully think about how you, as architects and future architects, can be really leading in the transformation of the UK housing stock. So, sorry, I need 3 hands to do this properly. So why do we need to retrofit our housing to use less energy? So the UK has some of the least efficient housing stock in Europe, also some of the oldest housing stock. And there are around 27 million homes in the UK, and together they're responsible for about a third of carbon emissions. So in order to achieve the Climate Change Act and achieve our commitments to reduce carbon emissions, we're going to have to tackle housing. There's no way of avoiding it. Around 90% of the housing that's standing today will still be here in 2050. So again, tackling existing housing is absolutely essential. We can't just get away with saying, well, let's just build everything new to be super efficient and net positive and so on. It's not going to work. Sorry. So one question that does come up quite often is, well, why not just knock down all the poorly performing housing and replace it with really efficient stuff that's purpose-built for our modern lifestyles? There are, lots of reasons for this, none least the heritage and the historical value of much of our housing. So in the UK, as I said, we have some of the oldest housing stock, and perhaps that's part of the reason why almost 5% of housing is in a conservation area, and 1.5% of homes are listed. So even if we wanted to, we wouldn't be able to just bulldoze the whole lot. There's also some strong environmental benefits for doing retrofit over rebuilding. The embodied carbon, so that's all the carbon caught up and contained in the materials that go into building our homes. We're not very good at disposing of building materials responsibly. So if we were to demolish homes, what would happen is an awful lot of really high value materials like stock brick and so on would end up in landfill or in lower value uses like as aggregate or cement mix and so on. So which way does this go? So how would you actually go about starting a low energy retrofit? So first of all, it's really about tackling space heating. So space heating accounts for about 60% of a dwelling's energy emissions, energy demand, the rest being appliances, light bulbs, and so on. And it's been calculated by someone other than me that we need to refurbish 2,000 homes per day between now and 2050 in order to actually meet that target. And as you can imagine, that isn't happening. So we're going to have to, that number's going to keep going up until things really accelerate. So what can we do about keeping the heat in? So I'm going to go through a couple of examples of what a retrofit project could look like, because there's lots of different versions of it. And then I want to consider how this could be scaled up and how the sort of housing stock could be transformed en masse. So first of all, here's an example of what's involved in a deep retrofit project. This is the 80% house by Pruitt Bisley Architects, completed in 2010. And as the name suggests, they were able to reduce carbon emissions by 80% through a really thorough refurbishment of a terraced, Georgian property in North London. So it was, because of the sort of heritage aspect of the facade, they did sort of minimal interventions on the front of the building, so internal wall insulation, replacement, but replica double glazed windows. And then to the rear of the property, you can see in the AXO, they went all out. They externally insulated the whole of the extended portion of the house. So this didn't, and finally also mechanical ventilation with heat recovery, because they'd achieved such a high level of airtightness that was the only way to provide sufficient ventilation to keep the various pollutants out. So this didn't come cheap. The cost was around £150,000 plus an additional 60k estimated for the sort of retrofit upgrade, so specifically the energy features. So next example is social housing upgrade in the Midlands, where they also achieved an 80% reduction in carbon emissions for about half the price, partly through being able to benefit from some economies of scale, because there was a group of, I think it was 14 houses, 14 homes on the estate, which were all refurbished at the same time. Similar set of retrofit measures, so lots of insulation, loft insulation, external wall insulation here, new windows and doors, and also the heat recovery ventilation system. But I think what we can see from both of these examples is that they're not really a model for mass retrofit, because 90k per dwelling is still potentially quite a lot of money. And I think a common theme across these case studies is the need for huge insight. Please excuse my son singing along in the background. Three things that are critical in a retrofit project. So there's the super insulation, the high air tightness, and also the heat recovery ventilation. So one of the projects I came across while I was researching for this talk was a case study that used 9 different types of insulation as part of a retrofit. So getting to those kind of 80% projects really is challenging. They're really involved. These are just 6 of those, the insulations that were featured. So wood fibre, aerogel, vacuum insulated panels, and various kind of plastic foams. Yeah, so getting to 80% on an individual project is very difficult, which probably explains why that progress is so slow and we're not doing 2,000 homes per day. But in contrast, something as simple as insulating a loft can actually reduce energy demand by 20% from a project, and can cost as little as a couple of £100, and perhaps take a couple of hours or maybe half a day's labour. Unfortunately, or fortunately for the climate, but less fortunate for practitioners, most properties with lofts in the UK have now been done, and the same applies to cavity walls with cavities in them. So the kind of easy stuff has been done, and what's left now to tackle is solid wall properties, which isn't quite so simple. Yeah, so how are you as an industry and you as architects going to persuade clients, landlords, homeowners, and so on to retrofit all the properties? So what this chart shows, it's the cost savings per tonne, or the cost per tonne of carbon dioxide saved of various retrofit interventions. And anything below 0, so to the left side of the chart, things that will pay back over their lifetime of that intervention. Things to the right are less cost efficient and cost effective. So what this shows is that loft insulation is relatively cheap. It pays back pretty quickly. On the other hand, solid wall insulation moves over to this side. So both internal and external solid wall insulation is quite expensive, and it won't pay back itself in terms of just the savings made on your energy bills. So that argument doesn't really stack up. So financial sort of arguments for retrofit without subsidy are quite weak, especially now that the straightforward interventions, things like the loft insulations, the replacing light bulbs, that's kind of been done. So therefore, we need to think of new ways to persuade and to stimulate the market and to get things happening. Luckily, energy savings aren't the only sort of positive aspect out of retrofit. And as well as the carbon impacts, a really good quality retrofit will have additional benefits, so improving the comfort, making homes warmer, and improving the health and the well-being of people who live in them. So we know that a huge number of people in the UK currently live in really substandard accommodation, so cold homes, and these lead to various health complications, things like increased respiratory illnesses, high prevalence of asthma, allergies, also mental health problems. It's been estimated that cold homes cost the NHS £1 billion per year. So we can see that if you carry out retrofit, the health benefits could actually be much more significant than the costs of your the savings on energy bills. So I think that's something to bear in mind when having the conversation. It's not really just about the energy. There are all these kind of co-benefits to retrofit that should be considered. So the next example is an example of what I think is a successful project which helped households save money on bills and also improved over 1,000 homes in London, particularly ones with solid wall insulation. So I'm really aware that this is a smart homes project, which was a government-funded intervention to provide £6,000 grants for people to improve the performance of their homes. Yeah, I'm aware that James Traynor from ECD Architects is here in the audience and actually was responsible for running part of this project. So I won't go into details, but essentially over 1,000 retrofit projects were carried out over a 2-year period. The scheme targeted different tenures, so private rented as well as homeowners, and it focused on solid wall insulation. So that's a kind of example of scaling this up and actually getting a bit more momentum going. And then this is going to be my last example. This is Chimney Pot Park in Salford. And what this project is a regeneration-led retrofit by the private developer Urban Splash. A retrofit of over 300 homes, which were sort of abandoned terraced housing near Manchester. And despite sort of quite a lot of controversy in this project around issues like gentrification, what I think it is really successful about it is that it's delivering refurbished homes at a scale, the kind of scale that I think we need in order to be getting up to that 2,000 homes per day. They gutted the homes and sort of reinvented the layout in a way that is more perhaps suitable to modern lifestyles. And I think from that perspective, they were it's extremely successful. So yeah, how can we scale up? This is my last slide and last thing I really want to just sort of leave to think about what we can actually do to as an industry and as a profession to accelerate that. How can you get involved in it? I know that already as architects you're juggling so many different things. There's all these pressures that even just sort of breaking ground can be quite an achievement. But a few things to think about. One is to keep having that conversation about retrofit, refurbishment, why it's been done. It's not just that climate change argument. I don't think that's going to work necessarily. And actually there's these wider benefits, the health, the improvements to the property. Stay abreast of subsidies, what's out there. The Green Deal was a monumental flop, but there are other programs out there, things like the smart homes. So yeah, work with experienced contractors. That's not meant to sound sort of patronising or trite, but it's more, there's a whole nother talk here, which is retrofit unintended consequences, what went wrong. So, you know, if life is a lot easier if you work with a team who know what they're doing. And finally, I think if you have to pick one intervention or a series of interventions, focus on the fabric. Things like plant, things like PV panels, they can all be taken out. They might not still be there in a few years' time. But if you do something to the fabric, chances are it'll still be there over the lifetime of the building, and therefore the impact potentially is much higher. And that's all. Thank you very much for listening.